Bumblesnort was famous in the tiny village of Wittershanks for being the least graceful wizard anyone had ever met. He had a propensity for dropping wands, tripping over spell books, and most embarrassingly, messing up even the simplest magical potions. Despite these flaws, there was something endearing about his enthusiasm. His robes might be perpetually covered in suspicious stains, but there was a twinkle in his eye that suggested he only needed the right opportunity to become the remarkable wizard he claimed he could be. Of course, this didn't stop the villagers from exchanging wary glances whenever he came near. If a potion was going to bubble over, smoke, or cause random transformations, it was always Fumblesnort at the center of the incident. That morning, the wizard was in his cramped workshop, fiddling with a bright purple potion that glowed ominously in a large flask. It was meant to be something he called the Wondrous Wake Me-Up, a brew intended to rival the mightiest cup of coffee. He wanted to create a phenomenal pick-me-up, something that would make the roosters crow seem lethargic. A single dose and you'd be more alert than a guard dog on watch. But as he stirred, the mixture crackled with electric sparks which were most definitely not part of the recipe. Fumblesnort squinted at the potion's swirling hue and took another look at the instruction scroll, muttering the words under his breath. He'd overlooked one small detail. Add the feather of a phoenix with the quill of a goose. Instead, he'd thrown in some leftover phoenix dust, along with a dodo feather he'd found in a discount bin at the local magical supply store. Close enough, he thought. How different could dodo feathers be? He tapped his wand against the side of the cauldron to calm the sizzling mixture. A few hours later, that small substitution would unleash more trouble than he could have imagined. But for now, Fumblesnort watched with pride as the potion's color finally settled into a pleasant lavender swirl. No more sparks or ominous crackles in sight. He let out a relieved sigh. Perhaps this time he'd managed to create something beneficial, and maybe the villagers would finally see him as a legitimate wizard instead of a perpetual accident waiting to happen. The following day dawned crisp and clear, with the scent of dew in the air. Eager to prove himself, Fumblesnort decided to test his new brew on a few members of the village. After all, it was the ultimate energy booster. Who wouldn't want that? With small vials carefully packaged into a wicker basket, he set out on the winding path that led from his workshop into the heart of Wittershanks. Excitement danced in his step as he approached the marketplace. Farmers were unloading barrels of apples, blacksmiths were setting up their wares, and a local clown juggled rainbow-colored handkerchiefs on a corner. "Good morning, Gilda," Bumblesnort said to the local baker, a kind woman with flour on her cheeks and a rolling pin perpetually in her hand. "I've created something spectacular to help you power through those early hours of kneading dough." He held out one of the vials, the liquid inside shimmering softly in the sunlight. He'd practiced a heroic smile in the mirror that morning, but it came off more like a nervous grin. Gilda, accustomed to Fumblesnort's unorthodox experiments, accepted the vial with a skeptical look. "Don't worry," he added quickly. "It's perfectly safe." Gilda turned the vial in her hand. "Well, I am feeling quite tired today. Stayed up late perfecting a new pastry recipe." She shrugged. "Why not?" With that, she drank it in 3 quick sips. At first, everything seemed perfectly normal. Then Gilda's eyes went wide, and she belched out a small puff of purple smoke. "That's interesting," she said in a hoarse voice, patting her chest. The crowd paused to watch, intrigued and alarmed. Fumblesnort's heart raced. This was the moment of truth. If Gilda praised the potion's effects, maybe he'd finally earn some trust. Before the baker could comment further, she shot off across the market with supernatural speed, leaving a trail of purplish footprints behind her. She darted around stalls so fast that cabbages and loaves of bread went flying in every direction as she whizzed by. Everyone else looked on in horror and surprise as she circled, unstoppable. Fumblesnort fumbled for his wand, hoping to produce a counterspell to slow her down. Instead of a neat swirl of enchantment, he accidentally launched a torrent of soap bubbles that popped in midair. People ducked and covered their heads while the wizard scrambled, frustration mounting. After several minutes of Gilda's rapid circuit around the marketplace, her frantic zooming finally died down. She collapsed face first into a giant sack of flour outside her bakery. A huge asterisk-shaped cloud of white powder erupted around her. When the air cleared, she stood up in a daze, covered head to toe in flour. Fumblesnort rushed over, apologizing profusely. A small crowd gathered, half concerned, half entertained. Gilda glared as she shook flour from her hair, an expression of awe, exhaustion, and annoyance all rolled into one. "I've never felt so awake," she panted, "or so hungry. But please, Fumblesnort, do me a favor and don't give that potion to anyone else." He sheepishly returned the rest of the vials to his basket, ignoring the disapproving murmurs circulating around him. He gave a nervous shrug as the villagers dispersed, heading back to their morning chores. Perhaps he'd been overzealous in testing the potion on unsuspecting folks. He'd go back to his workshop, analyze the formula, and correct the minor failing. He was certain that the basic concept was sound. It just needed a little more fine-tuning. By the time he scurried back along the path to his cluttered workshop, he was already rethinking the steps he'd taken. He recalled that maybe, just maybe, he'd read the instructions too hastily and added too much stardust. Or maybe the dodo feather was indeed too weak. Either way, he resolved to fix it. He rummaged through jars of strange ingredients: salamander glands, phoenix tears, shredded unicorn hair, everything one might need for a truly potent concoction. Finally, he set his sights on the essence of mellow, a soothing agent that was said to counteract hyperactivity in potions. He'd add just a couple of drops, thin out the mixture, and all would be well. Uncorking the essence of mellow, Fumblesnort carefully placed 2 drops into his cauldron. Then he stirred, chanting a stabilizing spell. The mixture darkened ominously, but that often happened in the early stages of potion brewing, or so he told himself. Even so, he felt a small jolt of panic when the brew began radiating heat and pulsing like a heartbeat. "Steady now," he breathed. "Steady." He tapped his wand twice on the lip of the cauldron, expecting the usual swirl of color that signified a stable potion. Instead, the potion gave a violent shudder, and a sudden geyser of gooey, lavender muck erupted from within. Fumblesnort dove to the ground, arms over his head, as the workshop was instantly coated in sticky slime. Jars toppled from shelves, sending ingredients scattering across the floor. Betrayed by his own footwear, the wizard tried to stand but slipped on the slime, crash-landing into a stack of old scrolls. The cauldron, continuing its volcano impersonation, spat out thick globs that slapped against the walls. When at last the eruption ceased, the entire workplace looked like a hideous lavender swamp. He peeled some of the substance from his beard, sighing. "Looks like it's back to basics," he muttered. One small mishap was manageable, but that second fiasco made it clear that he needed help, perhaps from someone more experienced in the arcane arts. Yet who would be willing to assist the clumsiest wizard in town? An idea sparked. There was an old acquaintance of his, an experienced potions master named Dr. Tanderwill, who lived in a grand ivy-covered tower on the edge of Widdershanks. Though Tanderwill had retired from public wizardry many seasons ago, he might be persuaded to lend a hand. Fumblesnort set out, still dripping from head to toe in potion residue, ignoring the curious stares of passers-by as he made his way to Tanderwill's tower. He felt strangely optimistic. Surely, with Tanderwill's guidance, he could correct his mistakes. A winding staircase led up to the wizard's domain. Fumblesnort climbed, panting, as each step creaked ominously. Runes glowed in the walls, casting dancing shadows. He finally reached the door, wrapped his wand on it, and waited. The door opened on its own, revealing a cluttered room filled with potions, books, and an assortment of magical oddities that made even Fumblesnort's workshop look tidy by comparison. Dr. Tanderwill was an elderly, white-bearded man in a polka-dotted robe and matching slippers. He offered Fumblesnort a small, patient smile. "What brings you here, my boy? You look like you fought a lavender octopus." Fumblesnort cleared his throat, unsure how to begin. "Sir, Well, I tried to invent this wondrous potion, you see, a sort of magical pick-me-up. It's slightly too potent. Then I tried to fix it, and that went disastrously. The village is fed up with me, and I need guidance." He gazed at Tanderwill with a mix of hope and embarrassment. The elder wizard stroked his beard thoughtfully, then slowly lowered himself into a plush armchair cluttered with dusty volumes. "I recall your ambition, lad. You always had good ideas, just a bit of trouble in the execution." He motioned for Fumblesnort to follow him to a rickety table near the window. "Well, let's see what you've done. Perhaps I can offer a solution before the entire village is thrust into magical chaos." With that, Fumblesnort produced a small leftover sample of the potion in a glass vial. Tanderwill examined its swirling color, sniffed it, and raised a single eyebrow. "Phoenix dust and dodo feather instead of phoenix feather. Hmm?" he muttered. "And far too much stardust. Yes, we can balance this out. But we'll need a catalyzing agent to stabilize the brew." He navigated through his shelves, flipping through ancient tomes, muttering to himself about the intricacies of potion synergy. At last, he pulled out a small jar labeled Essence of Earthbound Harmony. It was rumored to ground even the wildest potions, ensuring a calm equilibrium. "Just a pinch of this might do the trick," Tanderwill announced. Fumblesnort breathed a huge sigh of relief. With guidance, success seemed within reach. He followed the elder wizard to a large cauldron in the corner, watched carefully as Dr. Tanderwill measured a precise amount of the essence of earthbound harmony, and gently sprinkled it into the brew. The liquid flickered between glowing purple and soft green, finally settling into a gentle blue color that shimmered with promise. "See? Now we test," Tanderwill declared. "A single drop on a test parchment should reveal the potion's effect." He took a quill, dipped it into the concoction, and touched it to a small piece of enchanted parchment. Instantly, the parchment fluttered in the air, took on a bright gold sheen, and then drifted back down, its edge curling gracefully. Tanderwill nodded with satisfaction. "This is good. Let's fill a mug and see if it functions the way you intended." Ever eager, Fumblesnort volunteered to be the test subject. He took a cautious sip. Unlike Gilda's disastrous experience, there was no immediate burst of energy, no lightning speed. Instead, he felt a warm glow starting in his abdomen, a gentle surge of focus and motivation. The two wizards exchanged hopeful grins. It seemed that they had finally gotten the formula correct. The sensation was perfectly pleasant, no mania, no unstoppable chaos. At that moment, however, a small black cat with curious yellow eyes sauntered into the room. Tanderwill's feline familiar hopped onto the table, sniffing suspiciously at the brew. Before either wizard could intervene, the cat bumped the jar labeled Essence of Earthbound Harmony, tumbling it forward. In a sheer stroke of comedic horror, it splashed into the potion with a plunk. A fresh cloud of swirling color erupted from the cauldron as the entire formula went haywire, absorbing way more of the stabilizer than intended. The mixture began crackling and popping as though it were thrilled by the possibility of another explosion. "Not again!" Fumblesnort cried out. Tanderwill moved hastily, trying to fish out the jar, but the cauldron's surface was already swirling too violently. The cat scurried off, fur standing on end. Torn between scolding the cat and salvaging the brew, Tanderwill and Fumblesnort huddled over the cauldron, wands at the ready. Tendrils of multicolored steam rose, curling across the room like serpents. Books rattled on their shelves, vials clinked, and a tension-filled hum grew in the air. Then came an explosive whoosh. An enormous rainbow bubble expanded upward, engulfing the entire upper level of the tower in shimmering color. Fumblesnort felt himself lifted off his feet, flailing in zero gravity alongside Tanderwill. Together they floated, wide-eyed, as the bubble within the cauldron slowly grew outward. Shelves of jars and potions tipped over to join the weightless chaos. A stirring spoon drifted lazily past Fumblesnort's nose. He reached for it, but it twirled away. "What's going on?" he managed to sputter. Tanderwill, busy trying to cast a grounding enchantment to dispel the bubble, only managed to produce a few weak sparks from his wand. The bubble continued to expand, pressing against the walls of the tower until, with a final cartoonish pop, it burst. Gravity returned in an instant, sending the two wizards, along with every potion bottle and book, tumbling to the floor in a chaotic avalanche. Fumblesnort coughed, forcing himself to stand, only to realize that the potion had seeped through the flooring and dripped down into the village below. He raced to a window and threw it open, craning his neck to see what was happening outside. His heart sank. About half the villagers were floating just above the ground, some only inches from the cobblestone streets and others bobbing near rooftops. Like helium balloons tethered to invisible strings, they drifted around with shocked expressions. Children clutched their parents' hands, trying not to float away entirely. Goats bleated in dismay as they found themselves hovering above their pens. The baker Gilda soared from her shop door, trailing a ribbon of flour behind her. "Good heavens!" Tanderwill exclaimed, peering out from behind Fumblesnort. "It appears that the runaway brew has granted everyone a measure of buoyancy. We must remedy this at once." Meanwhile, Fumblesnort's stomach churned with guilt and panic. More chaos he had caused, more trouble for the village that had only just begun trusting wizards again, or so he'd hoped. The two wizards rushed downstairs, stepping past swirling potions and scattered books in various states of disarray. Emerging into daylight, they navigated floating villagers, promising that they would fix this immediately. Tanderwill penned a quick incantation on a slip of parchment and handed it to Fumblesnort. "Recite this enchantment across the town," Tanderwill instructed. "It's a widely known grounding spell, usually used in advanced horticulture. But it should work on living beings as well, so long as you concentrate." Fumblesnort nodded, swallowing hard. The villagers looked at him with a mix of confusion and concern. Taking a deep breath, he began chanting the poem-like incantation, hands trembling around his wand. At first, nothing happened. Well, that was to be expected when Fumblesnort was involved. But then he felt a surge of warmth course through his fingertips, as though some part of him had finally clicked into alignment with the magic. One by one, the villagers began gently drifting back toward the ground. Some landed softly on hay bales or in puddles, while others, disoriented, stumbled a bit. A smattering of relieved cheers arose, quickly replaced by a rumble of urgent questions. "Why are we floating? Is this permanent? How do we know it won't happen again?" Fumblesnort struggled to answer, but all eyes turned on him as though he alone were responsible for the entire fiasco. Even Tanderwill maintained a solemn silence, seemingly deferring to Fumblesnort. Fear welled up in the younger wizard's chest, but he steadied himself. "I'm sorry, everyone," he said, voice quavering. "I had the best intentions, I truly did. I wanted to create a helpful potion, something to give energy without chaos. But my efforts have brought you nothing but trouble. I swear I'll clean up all the mess." He glanced at Tanderwill, who gave him a firm nod of encouragement. A few villagers exchanged skeptical looks, but Gilda stepped forward, remembering how the potions had made her zip around the marketplace. Flour still dotted her hair, and she looked like she had a question burning on her tongue. "Fumblesnort," she said, "maybe potions that alter our energy levels shouldn't be tested on unsuspecting neighbors. But if you truly want to help, we could find a safer way, something that benefits us without sending us into orbit." A wave of hope washed over him. "Yes, absolutely," he replied. "I'll redouble my studies, focus on simpler spells and potions first. I'll consult the people who know more about potions than I do so we can be cautious in our approach. And if you'll allow me, I'd still like to make something that helps bakers and blacksmiths, farmers and fishermen to get through their long days, but carefully." Tanderwill cleared his throat. The fellow wizard placed a reassuring hand on Fumblesnort's shoulder. "I think we can strive for that, my boy," he said kindly. "Perhaps there's a more natural, less drastic way to give people a boost. We can look into advanced natural remedies that you can infuse with just a hint of magic." Various villagers nodded. After all, nothing quite bridged the gap between mortal and magic worlds like the promise of a small convenience, if it was, indeed, safe. The blacksmith wiped his sweaty brow, muttering that some days were so taxing he would buy a cart full of the stuff if it came without side effects. The farmer chimed in agreement, complaining how tedious it was to plow fields from sunrise to sunset. Soon the crowd's anxious murmuring transformed into constructive chatter about how to calmly harness magical assistance without needing to cling to a rooftop. Fumblesnort took one last look around. The marketplace was strewn with leftover floating debris. Some wayward goats were still drifting near fences, but Tanderwill's spells quickly corralled them. An impromptu brigade of villagers began organizing to clean up and gather any strange potions that had spilled from Tanderwill's tower. In a remarkable display of community spirit, even Gilda jumped in to help wrangle the last bits of floating flour from her bakery door. Despite the fiasco, Fumble Snort sensed that a seed of something positive was being planted. Perhaps it was the camaraderie of everyone working together, or maybe a collective relief that no one had been truly hurt. One child even tried to replicate the floating effect by jumping off a low stone wall, only to land on his feet with an indignant frown, disappointed that the magic had already worn off. The child's parent, exasperated, promised never to let Fumble Snort's potions near their child again, at least not until the wizard had thoroughly proven his ability to keep them safe. Later that afternoon, Tenderwill returned to his tower, exhausted by the day's turmoil, but surprisingly upbeat. Fumble Snort stayed behind in the village, helping to repair the scattered damage caused by runaway potions and accidental weightlessness. He retrieved the basket of tainted vials he'd once been so proud to gift. True, the morning's frenzy left him with fresh bruises and wounded pride, but bit by bit, as he restocked shelves and set carts upright, he felt something else, an unyielding sense of determination. He ended his day in the local tavern, where the barmaid Gretchen greeted him with a curt nod, but served him a hearty stew on the house, possibly out of pity. A few villagers approached timidly, asking him about how the floating had felt and whether they could replicate it in a controlled amuse-the-kids type of scenario. Fumble Snort promised he'd look into a safe enchantment specifically for children's parties someday, but only if they'd let him do it with Tanderwill's oversight. Nobody wanted a repeat of random floating goats. That night, in the glow of the tavern's cozy hearth, Fumble Snort reflected on everything that had happened. In a single day, he'd caused a supercharged dash through the marketplace, destroyed the interior of his workshop, forced an elderly potions master to break his peaceful retirement, launched half the town into the air, and then, at last, brought them gently back to Earth. As comedic chaos went, it was one for the history books. Strangely, though, the fiasco seemed to break the ice between him and the townsfolk. Sure, they feared his clumsiness, but they also saw how earnestly he tried to fix his mistakes. So, with a simple vow, he promised himself he would become a better wizard, one mishap at a time. In the following days, Tanderwill and he would resume their collaboration, trying to tweak the formula for something more subtle, perhaps a catalyst that merely brought a contented, gentle wakefulness rather than a mad sprint or unexpected levitation. He learned that magic was about balance and caution, not big dramatic gestures that garnered instant admiration. And though the road to mastery would be full of pratfalls and flubs, Fumble Snort found some solace in knowing that, despite his clumsiness, he had something that truly mattered, a spirit that refused to give up. By the time he finished his stew, the tavern had nearly emptied for the night. He looked around at the quiet corners, the messy tables. He remembered how the day began with a desire to do something grand, and how it ended with a humbling lesson in magical humility. Taken all together, it felt like a comedic twist on a grand adventure less glamorous than Quest for golden artifacts, but far more personal. He stepped outside, a gentle breeze ruffling his hair, and turned to see a couple of villagers wave goodnight. He waved back, stepping in a small puddle from an overturned water trough. Some things never changed. He was still as clumsy as ever, but at least now he tripped forward with a more thoughtful mindset. He headed home along the moonlit path, ears still echoing with the high-pitched giggles of children recounting how silly everyone looked floating around. A faint smell of magical residue clung to his robes, but the night was peaceful, and he felt an odd pride. Yes, the day was a disaster in many senses, but he had persevered. More importantly, the village had somehow come together to handle the crisis. If that wasn't magic, he thought, then what was? As the porch of his workshop came into view, a warm lantern glow revealed the extent of the sticky goo that had coated every surface. It would take him ages to scrub it all clean, but as he stepped inside, he remembered Tanderwill's quiet words of encouragement. With a flick of his wand, he conjured a simple cleaning spell, letting the buckets and brushes start swirling in place, which was quite an improvement over the mop fiasco of past attempts. He let out a small chuckle, relaxing for the first time since sunrise. There was no telling what new disasters might unfold tomorrow, but for tonight, at least, there was solace in knowing that Fumble Snort Despot, all evidence to the contrary, was learning. And if there was one constant truth about wizards and Wittershanks, it was that determination and a genuine desire to help the community could be some of the mightiest spells of all. With that comforting thought, the clumsy wizard let himself drift into a well-earned sleep, hoping dreams of success might blossom, along with the messy mishaps of the day. And floating goats, too, for that matter. After all, in the pursuit of magic, sometimes the biggest blunders made for the greatest stories